The moment I set the pen down on that conference table, my sister lunged forward and grabbed my wrist so hard I felt my pulse against her fingers. "You are going to sign that," she said. "Not asked," said. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. Then I looked at the estate attorney sitting across from us, a quiet man named Mr. Connor, 60-something, the kind of person who had probably seen everything in 30 years of probate law. He was watching my sister's hand on my wrist with an expression I couldn't quite read yet. I said very calmly, "Let go of me." She didn't. That was the moment I knew exactly how this was going to end. Not for her, for me. My dad died on the Tuesday in March. He was 61 years old, which is not old enough, and he died of a heart attack in the driveway of the house he'd spent 22 years paying off in Greenville, South Carolina. The neighbor found him. I was in Charlotte, an hour and a half away, sitting at my desk at work when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was the neighbor's cell, and she said, "Honey, you need to come home." I drove that hour and a half in 53 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I left the parking garage and looked at it again when I pulled onto my dad's street and saw the ambulance still parked in front of the house. They let me sit with him for a little while before they took him. I don't talk about those minutes. There are some things that are yours and only yours. My sister showed up 40 minutes after I did. She lives 20 minutes away. That's not a detail I included for sympathy. It's just a detail. It told me something I filed away without fully understanding yet. My dad and my sister were close in a way that I used to think was beautiful. She was his firstborn. She called him every Sunday. She went to his church with him on holidays. When I moved to Charlotte for my job, I'm a forensic accountant. I work primarily on commercial litigation cases. She stayed in Greenville, and she became the one who handled things. Took him to doctor's appointments, helped him with his taxes, was physically present in a way that distance made difficult for me. I was grateful for that. I told her so. I meant it. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that my sister had been slowly, methodically, over the course of 4 years, positioning herself to inherit everything my father owned, not because she was entitled to it, because she'd decided she was. My father's house was worth $340,000. He had a retirement account with $218,000 in it. He had a savings account. He had a 2019 Ford truck and a workshop full of tools he'd collected since before I was born. He wasn't wealthy by any standard, but he'd worked 31 years at the same manufacturing plant in Greenville, and he'd been careful with his money in a way that mattered. He owned things, real things, things he'd built a life around. His will, the one he'd drafted 11 years ago with a local attorney, split everything equally between my sister and me. She'd known that for years, and she'd decided it wasn't acceptable. I found out about the new will on a Thursday, 10 days after the funeral. Mr. Connor called me. He was professional and brief. He said my father had come to his office 14 months ago and executed a new will. He said the new document left the house, the retirement account, and substantially all of the estate to my sister. He said I was welcome to come in and review the document at my convenience. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Publix for about 20 minutes after that call. Then I drove home, opened my laptop, and started doing what I do for a living. Here's what forensic accountants understand that most people don't. Money leaves tracks. Every transaction, every transfer, every signature on every document, it all leaves a trail. The trail isn't always obvious, and it isn't always easy to follow, but it's there. It's always there. My father was not a sophisticated financial person. He kept paper records. He had one checking account, one savings account, one brokerage account through his employer's retirement plan. His financial life was simple and clean and easy to audit. I started with the checking account. I called his bank. I was still listed as an authorized contact on the account from years ago, before I moved, when I used to help him with occasional overdraft issues, and I requested 12 months of statements. The statements arrived in my email 3 days later. What I found in them took me the better part of a night to fully understand, and then another night to stop feeling sick about. and then a third night to start building into something I could use. My sister had power of attorney over my father's finances. She'd had it for 2 years. I hadn't known about this either. It was executed quietly with a notary at a UPS store, the kind of simple POA document you can download from a legal website for $35. She had used that power of attorney to move money, not in large amounts, nothing that would have triggered a bank flag. Transfers of $800 here, $1,200 there, $600 somewhere else, over the course of 19 months, moved into an account I didn't recognize. I ran the account number through every tool I had access to in my professional capacity, and what I found was that the receiving account was a joint account held by my sister and her husband. The total transferred was just under $47,000. My father had been living on a fixed income since his early retirement 3 years ago. He had not known or had not understood or had been told something that made him believe these transfers were normal. I don't know which. I will never know which. That's the part I've had to make peace with. I didn't call my sister. I didn't call any other family member. I called an estate litigation attorney in Columbia named Ms. Whitfield, who a colleague had used in a case 2 years earlier and described as the kind of person you want in your corner when it matters. I told Ms. S. Whitfield everything I had. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "When is the estate reading?" I told her. 3 weeks away, she said. "I'll be there." I said, "I'll be there." I said, "There's something else." I told her about the new will, about the timing of it, 14 months ago, which was right in the middle of the period when the transfers were happening. I told her I had a theory about why my father might have signed a new will at that particular moment in time and what pressure might have been applied to make him do it. "Miss Jarson," Whitfield said, "I've seen this before." I said, "I know you have." She said, "Do you have documentation of his cognitive state around that time?" I said, "I'm working on it." What I found in my father's medical records, which I obtained legally as his surviving next of kin, with a formal records request, was that my father had visited his primary care physician 6 weeks before the new will was signed. The visit notes documented that he had complained of memory issues, confusion, difficulty following conversations. His doctor had referred him to a neurologist. That referral appointment had been scheduled and then canceled. The cancellation was logged in the records. My sister had driven him to that primary care appointment. Her name was in the intake notes as the accompanying family member. The neurology appointment that was canceled. The cancellation had been called in by someone identifying as a family member. I stared at that record for a very long time. The estate reading was held in Mr. Connor's conference room on a Friday morning in May. My sister was there with her husband, my aunt. My father's younger sister was there because she was named in the original will for a specific bequest, a set of china that had belonged to my grandmother. My sister's 2 adult children were there, which I thought was odd, but I didn't say anything. Ms. Whitfield was there. I introduced her as my attorney. My sister looked at her and then looked at me, and something shifted in her face. Not guilt, something colder. Recalculation. Mr. Connor began reading. He was meticulous and unhurried, the kind of person who treats every word of a legal document with the respect it deserves. He read through the preamble, the executor designation, my sister, named in the new will, and then the asset distribution. The house, to my sister. The retirement account, to my sister. The savings account, to my sister. The truck and personal property, to my sister. The workshop contents, to my sister. A specific bequest of the china set to my aunt. A specific bequest of the china set to my aunt. A specific bequest to me, my father's watch. His Seiko, the one he'd worn every day since 1987. The one his own father had given him when he graduated high school. I looked at the watch provision. Then I looked at my hands on the table in front of me. I breathed through it. My sister pushed a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a transfer authorization, pre-tipped with my name on it, confirming that I agreed the new will represented my father's final wishes, and that I would not contest the estate. She said, "I need you to sign this today." Mr. Closing. Connor needs it for the probate filing. I looked at Mr. Connor. He looked back at me with a neutral expression that told me very clearly that he had not asked for this document and had no idea it was coming. I said, "I'm not signing that." My sister said, "Dad wanted this." "You know he did. You were never here. I was the one who took care of him. I was the one who gave up years of my life. This is fair. This is what he wanted." I said, "Then it'll hold up in court." She stood up. Her husband stood up. She pointed at me across the table and said very quietly, "You sign that paper, or I will make sure every person in this family knows what kind of daughter you were. You abandoned him. You left. You moved away for your career, and you left him alone, and I was the one who was there, and you do not get to walk in here now and take what isn't yours." The room was completely still. My aunt was looking at the table. My sister's children were looking at their phones. Mr. Tell. Connor had gone very quiet. Miss Whitfield said, in a voice that was almost gentle, "Are you finished?" My sister turned to look at her. Miss Whitfield said, "Because I'd like to share something with Mr. Connor before we go any further." She opened her own folder and placed a document on the table. "This is a formal notice of intent to contest the estate on grounds of undue influence and potential testamentary incapacity. My client has documentation of her father's cognitive concerns at the time the new will was executed, documentation of unauthorized financial transfers from his accounts over a 19-month period totaling approximately $47,000, and documentation of a canceled neurology referral that we believe was obstructed. We will be filing in probate court on Monday." The silence in that room was different from any silence I have ever sat inside. My sister said, "That's a lie." Ms. Whitfield said, "It's a filing. Your response to it is a matter for the court." Mr. Connor said quietly, "I think we should conclude this meeting." My sister turned back to me. Her face had gone through several expressions very quickly and had landed on something I recognized from childhood. That specific look she got when she realized she was not going to get what she wanted, and had not yet decided what to do about it. When we were kids, it usually meant she was about to cry or throw something. We were not kids anymore. She said, "After everything I did for him," I said, "I know what you did for him." She grabbed her folder and walked out. Her husband followed. Her children followed. Her children followed. The door to the conference room closed. My aunt looked up from the table. Her eyes were wet. She said, "I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what to do." I said, "You didn't have to do anything. I handled it. The probate court process took 8 months. I won't make it sound clean or simple, because it wasn't. Estate litigation is slow and expensive, and emotionally exhausting in a way that is entirely unlike normal exhaustion. It doesn't just tire you out. It makes you question things you thought you knew about your own history, your own family, your own understanding of what is real." There were depositions. There were financial experts. There was a neurologist who reviewed my father's medical records and provided a written opinion about his likely cognitive state at the time the new will was signed. There was a handwriting analyst who looked at his signature on the new will and compared it to signatures on documents from earlier years. My sister hired an attorney. She countered everything. She filed motions. She gave a deposition in which she described my father as having been completely of sound mind and described my absence from his life as evidence of my indifference to his welfare. She was composed and convincing, and I understood, watching the transcript later, exactly how she had managed to get my father to trust her with everything. But the transfers were real. The bank records were real. The medical notes were real. The canceled neurology appointment was real. The timeline was real. The judge voided the second will. She found insufficient evidence to support testamentary capacity at the time of execution. She found the circumstances of the POA transfers concerning enough to order a full accounting of all funds moved under power of attorney during the relevant period. She ordered restitution of $47,000 to the estate. She referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office for potential further review. My sister did not look at me when the decision was read. I looked at her. I wanted to understand something. I still don't, entirely. The estate was distributed under the original will, the one my father had written 11 years ago, when he still had his full mind and no one was in his ear telling him what to do with it. half to my sister, half to me. I know what some people would think about that. I've had people tell me, in so many words, that she didn't deserve to receive anything after what she'd done. And I understand that feeling. I've had it myself, in the middle of the night, going back over everything. But that wasn't what my father wanted. What my father wanted, what he set down in writing when he was fully himself, was for his two daughters to share what he'd spent his life building. I wasn't going to override that, even after everything. I used my share to pay off the remainder of my car loan, pad my emergency fund, and set up a small scholarship in my father's name through his church. The scholarship goes to first-generation college students in Greenville County. That felt like the right thing. He would have liked that. My father's Seiko watch is in my nightstand. I wind it every morning. I haven't spoken to my sister since the day of the estate reading. She sent emails, a few texts in the early months that started combative and eventually became something closer to plaintive. I read them. I didn't respond. I'm not sure what I would say. I'm not sure there's anything to say that would be useful to either of us. My aunt and I have lunch every couple of months when I drive down to Greenville. She asks about my work. I ask about her garden. We don't talk about my sister. We talk about my father, the good parts, the funny parts, the specific texture of who he was, his bad puns, his workshop radio that only got one station, the way he could fix anything mechanical but couldn't figure out how to set the clock on his microwave. Those conversations are the best part of my trips down. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I've turned over more times than I can count, is the neurology appointment. Not the money. The money was recoverable. The money was paper and numbers and account transfers, and paper and numbers can be documented and challenged and corrected. The appointment. She canceled his neurology appointment when his own doctor looked at him and said there's something we need to look at more closely, and scheduled someone to do that looking. She canceled it. She called the office and said, "No, we don't need that, he's fine." I don't know what he would have been told at that appointment. I don't know whether earlier intervention would have changed anything about his last year or his last months. I don't know what the neurologist would have found, but my father deserved to know. He deserved to have that information about his own health, about his own mind, and someone who claimed to love him took that from him. That's the part I don't have a tidy resolution for. I'm not sure I ever will. People sometimes ask me, colleagues mostly, who know some version of what happened, how I kept it together through all of it, how I stayed focused, how I didn't fall apart. I tell them the truth. I've spent my entire career helping people untangle financial deception. I know what evidence looks like. I know how to build a case. I know how to hold things at a distance when I need to, and let myself feel them when I can. That professional training was a gift in the worst year of my life. I won't pretend otherwise. But the other part of the answer, the part I don't always say out loud, is that I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for my dad. For the 31 years he worked. For the careful, unglamorous, steady way he built something from nothing. Not because he expected to be wealthy, but because he wanted his daughters to have a foundation. He told me that once when I was in college and worried about my student loans. He said, "I'm not going to be able to hand you a fortune. But when I'm gone, there'll be something. I promise you there'll be something." He kept his promise. I kept mine. I've thought about cause and effect a lot in the year since this ended. Not in any abstract way. Concretely, specifically, tracing the line from one decision to the next and watching where it leads. My sister made choices, small ones at first, probably. A transfer here, a canceled appointment there. Each one must have felt manageable in the moment, justified by some private accounting she was keeping about sacrifice and proximity and what she was owed. That's how it works, I think. Nobody starts with the intention of defrauding their dying father. They start with a grievance, real or imagined, and they let it grow until it becomes permission. What she didn't account for was that every one of those choices left a mark. Bank records, medical notes, a log entry in a scheduling system at a neurology office. She treated the financial trail like it was invisible because my father couldn't see it, and I was an hour and a half away. She forgot. or never knew, that I do this for a living. That I have spent my entire career reading exactly the kind of documents she thought no one would ever look at. That's the part that stays with me about intelligence. Not cleverness, not cunning, but the real kind. The kind that comes from building actual skills over years of showing up and doing the work. My training didn't make me special. It made me prepared. There's a difference, and that difference is the gap between what she expected would happen and what actually did. The ethics piece is harder to talk about because it's more personal. I was raised by the same man she was. Same house, same values, same father who worked 31 years at that plant and never once complained about it in front of us. I don't know when she decided those values didn't apply to her situation. I don't know what she told herself. What I know is that I had a choice to make too, when I found those bank statements, when I saw the pattern, and I chose to pursue it the right way. Through attorneys, through court filings, through documented evidence presented to a judge, not because it was easy, because it was the only version of this I could live with afterward. And the resilience, the staying in it through 8 months of litigation, through depositions, through reading transcripts of my sister describing me as someone who abandoned our father, that didn't come from being strong in any natural sense. It came from having something worth staying in it for. My dad made a promise to me when I was 20 years old and worried about student loans. He said there would be something. He worked 31 years to make sure of it. The least I could do was fight for what he built. Mr. Connor, the estate attorney, called me after the judge's decision came through. He didn't say much. He said, "Your father would have been glad someone was paying attention." I thanked him and got off the phone and sat in my car for a few minutes before I drove home. Miss See that. Whitfield sent me a handwritten note. It said, "This is why the work matters." I have both of those somewhere. I kept them. My dad's watch is still on my nightstand. I wind it every morning before I do anything else. It takes about 30 seconds. It's the best 30 seconds of my day.